Okay, so you're likely familiar with the DISC personality styles, and I'll give a quick refresher of those four. You might write this in your notes because these are much more subtle skills that can make a meaningful difference. Let me give you the definitions of the four for D, I, S, and C. So DISC, the D stands for driven or dominant. Those are the, generally speaking, the get stuff done, the driven, competitive, assertive type people. There's no right or wrong to any of these, by the way. So just hear this as you're all perfect just the way you are. Yet everybody kind of shows up to the party behaving a little bit differently. The I stands for influential or influencing. Those are, generally speaking, the very sociable, talkative, connector type people. They're generally really smiley and good at networking. They tend to have a lot of friends and people, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. The S is for steady, or sometimes also systematic will be something that you'll hear about an S. These are, as the names imply, people who tend to be more thorough, systems-oriented, not necessarily detail-oriented, although they often are. Detail orientation lives on C, which we'll talk about in just a second. However, think methodical, nurturing, patient. Those are types of words that would describe someone who exhibits the S personality. And then C stands for correctness or compliance. You'll hear those used interchangeably. This is more the detail orientation, perfectionistic tendencies. There's a little bit of this of like afraid to make mistakes, also lives on the high end of the C scale. Very rarely does someone just exhibit one of these and not the other three. As you can appreciate, it's kind of a blend of these. More commonly, you will see people exhibit two of these personality traits quite commonly, and then the other two as sort of their corresponding offsets. There are two sort of gauges that you want to be looking at if you're attempting to read someone's personality style. Those two things are, number one, speed, and number two, temperature. And I'll explain. The speed piece is about rate of speech. How fast do they talk? The temperature piece is about the feeling, the energetic feeling that you get when you're in their orbit. And I'll explain both of those very quickly. So rate of speech is a much easier thing to determine because it is either fast or it is slow. And there's also kind of a regional approach to this as well. So for someone who grew up in rural Georgia and has lived in the Southeast most of his life, I have a pretty fast rate of speech for a Southerner. However, as you could appreciate, if I were in Boston or New York City or Chicago or, somewhere mid-Atlantic, Northeast, even urban West Coast kind of stuff, you might see where others might have a rate of speech faster than mine. So you also sort of have to take into account a little bit of a regional thing there. Slow rate of speech, as you know, does not necessarily mean intellectually slow. It just means they're more likely to be processing things. But for rate of speech, fast rate of speech is an indicator of D or I. So you can immediately rule out two personality styles if you have fast rate of speech. They're talking fast, they are D or I at least. Slow rate of speech, S or C. Temperature, the vibe that you get from them when you're around them or you're communicating with them. You have four options here: hot, warm, cool, cold. Hot, warm, cool, cold. So let's take these in order of DISC for just a second. The D is going to give off a cool vibe. And I don't mean cool like hip cool. I mean cool like sometimes maybe on the border of standoffishness. Not totally aloof, however, flashes of aloofness. You guys tracking with me on this? Okay, so cool equals D. Hot equals I. There is oftentimes, unless taken to excess, there's oftentimes like a magnetic draw that an I is capable of. People want to be in their orbit. Any of these taken to excess are bad. Like you've been around someone who's a super like off the charts, influential, sociable person who just can't seem to shut up, and then no one wants to be around them. We're not talking about that. We're talking about the person who has some degree of emotional control around their personality style. So hot is going to show up as an I. Warm, like in a nurturing way, warm is going to be the S. This is the calm, caring, usually very soft around the edges, sort of like the quintessential, and this is not a stereotype, like the quintessential grandma kind of feeling, like you kind of want to just be there with that person because you feel really good when you're around them, because they're very supportive. So that's the warm feeling that you're going to get from the S. And then the C is cold. And not that they're necessarily rude, although any of these personality styles can be rude. That's more of an emotional intelligence thing. The cold of the C is more standoffishness, or they lack approachability, generally speaking. So you have a way to begin to, and I know you're already all thinking about each other. You're probably all thinking about your spouses or partners, if applicable. You're thinking about other agents in the firm. You're thinking about your clients. Like, it's really easy when playing this game to start running people through your mind and sort of put them into buckets. The reason this is really important, and your ability to read people, is have you ever had a situation? I'm sure you have. Have you ever had a situation where you're communicating with someone for the first time and you think, God, I really like this person. They really get me and I really get them. Like, we just clicked immediately. Anyone other than me ever felt that way? Okay. Almost always, not every time, almost always, that's going to be because they're kind of wired the same way that you are. It's easy to communicate with that person. You're already on the same wavelength. Generally, probably have the same relative temperature, generally have the same relative rate of speech. Opposites do tend to attract in long-standing relationships. However, things that like fire right out of the gate communicatively often are with people who are wired the same way that you are. So a lot of the communication challenges that we have with people actually arise from the fact that they live on a totally different planet than we do. And in our business, we tend to want to kind of drive the bus. And if we're not careful, we're driving the bus in a way that is consistent with our own personality styles and not consistent with the personality style of the buyer or seller that we're attempting to influence. So now, with all of that context, and this is kind of some next level stuff. So if like first level in our business is like just general knowledge of things, and then second level of knowledge or second level of skill is more like a lot of the stuff that we work on typically in these calls. There's like these tactical ways of doing things. Like, if you do it this way, you're going to get a better result than if you do it that way, or some language kind of stuff, or some objection handling kind of stuff. Like, all that sort of lives in that second level. What we're talking about right now is can be, when done well, kind of some third level kind of things, some subconscious type stuff that you can be aware of, that the other party is not aware that you are aware of it. And please don't misinterpret this as like attempting to manipulate someone. I never want to do that. This is all about the soft skills and the understandings that really set you up for success, or at least give you the highest probability of doing it. Okay, so let's go back. You are wired a certain way. I'm wired a certain way. Let me use myself as an example, because it's easy to pick on me. It will probably come as no surprise that on a scale of 1 to 100, and you might write these down because I'm going to go through each of the four, picking on myself so you understand the application of it. Scale of 1 to 100, my D is 99. However, my I sort of flutters between, depending on, I've taken multiple DISC assessments, sort of flutters in like the 60 to 70 zone. So let's call my I 65. My S is 2, and my C is about 30 to 40, depending on ones I've taken. So let's call C 35. So I'm 99, 65, 2, 35 for purposes of this discussion. Let's talk about the two like low end, or let's talk about low ends of the spectrum for each of these. Again, there's not good or bad, there just is. So my S of 2, what lives on the low end of the S scale is speed, impatience, the inclination toward variety and change. So you can easily think of this as like the opposite of steady and thorough and consistent and nurturing. Low S's want to go fast, and low S's want the variety that comes from that. You might also find it interesting to know that in the general population, the most prevalent of the 4 personality styles is high S. So you could easily see that as a low S, if I'm kind of driving the bus in the direction that I want to go, which is fast, let's get it done, not wasting time, which also kind of lives on the D scale as well, that I might unnecessarily push people into making decisions that they're not comfortable with. This is how this can begin to show up in sales. Under stressful situations, we will all double down on our own personality style. So this is where an understanding of how each of us is wired is really important. So here's what that would mean for me if I was not situationally aware of this. I've spent 15 years on this topic, so I'm not perfect. However, I got a pretty good idea on it. A 99D 2S under stressful situations is going to push harder, is going to be more assertive, dominant, or driven, and is going to expect things to happen faster. And if I know that and I'm in a stressful situation and I know I'm going to double down on that, could you see where there is likely to be a negative consequence of that? That can happen in a negotiation. That can happen in working with a buyer or seller if I were still doing that. That could happen in working with a client. That could happen with my team. An emotionally unaware person of a personality style like mine leaves dead bodies in their wake, particularly in stressful situations. Now, you could play all of the other scenarios. Someone who is a high I under stressful situations, like in a listing consult or a buyer consult where they're getting objections that they don't know really how to handle, they're just going to talk their butts off because they're doubling or tripling down on that sociability. That may or may not be a good thing, depending on who's on the other side of the table. The S is going to tend to slow down. They're going to tend to be more thorough. Things will sort of begin to creep to a snail's pace in a way that perhaps nothing actually gets done. That's not necessarily a bad thing. What ends up happening, though, oftentimes, and this is really instructive, particularly in working with buyers, if you know that you're working with a high S buyer, the biggest fear of a high S is change. They are in a stressful time in their lives because they're buying real estate, which most people only do a few times in their lives. They will tend to double down on that personality style, which means that they slow down, become more thorough and methodical. They become less decisive. They almost come to a grinding halt. And if we're not careful, it's like someone of my style would want to push them harder to get them to make a decision. And that actually has the opposite effect because you will cause them to completely shut down. So if you ever had a buyer like that and you start pushing them hard and they react the opposite, they're just reacting in a manner that's consistent with like self-preservation. And if you have a high C, remember those are the compliant, correct, super detail-oriented people. Under duress, they will dig into that even more. And that perfectionistic tendency will cause them to be indecisive because their biggest fear is making a mistake. So really the only person you can get away with pushing harder under duress is the D, because the D is pushing themselves. The I, the S, and the C under duress in our business are not going to, generally speaking, not going to do anything consistent with decision making. The I is just going to get in a cotton candy spinner and run around. The S is going to freak out and shut down. And then the C is going to seek out more detail because they can't run the risk of being wrong. Therefore, it comes to sort of a grinding halt. So if you know all of these things about both yourself and the person on the other side, you begin to, and this is like way next level kind of stuff, you begin to look for ways to tailor both your environment and your presentations to meet the personality style of the individual. So easy for me to work with a D because all I have to do is be myself. Comparatively a little more difficult for me to work with a super high I. My business partner, Debbie, who is awesome at a lot of things, she's sort of an anomaly from a behavioral standpoint. And this is statistically true. I'm not dogging on her. She is 99D, 99I. And basically no S and basically no C. So on the D part, when it's time for us to get stuff done, great. We just run. Like, doesn't really matter. We'll talk over each other. We'll butt heads. We'll fight like siblings. And somehow we'll figure out a way to get it done. It's totally fine. And then there are times, and she would tell you this when she's on the call, she never runs out of words. And here's an interesting way to think about personality styles as well. And if you guys haven't done a DISC assessment before, or it's been a while and you want to do them, we have access for you for free to do them through us. It's one of the perks of coaching. And you'll get like a 40-something page report on it. Think about the DISC scale, though, as battery life. And I know I'm going long on this, and hopefully this is helpful. And if it's not, at least I'm having fun. So I wake up in the morning with 99D. I have 99% battery life in D. I have 65% battery life in I. I have 2% battery life in S. I have 35% battery life in C. And as I roll along through the day, I'm depleting that the same way you would the battery on your cell phone. Well, here's what that means for me relative to Debbie. Debbie at 99D, 99I. There's a point in the day for me where my 65I has gone to 0. For me, usually that's around about dinner time. Pretty much after dinner or around there, I'm done with words. Like, you want to go play a pickup basketball game at 9 o'clock at night? Awesome. I'm in, because I got 99D left, which means I'm ultra competitive and I also like sports. So you could wake me up out of a dead sleep and ask me if I want to do something competitive, and I'm ready to play. You could wake me up out of a dead sleep and ask me if I wanted to do something that was thorough or detailed or methodical or even somewhat sociable. And I'm like, nah, not really. So you can also sort of think about what you have left. And the reason this is instructive is that Debbie and I, a handful of times per year, travel together for work reasons. And like we have a big conference we're going to in Austin next week, Debbie and I and a couple other people from our firm. And by the time the day is over and all the business meetings are over and all that has happened that I'm very, very engaged in, and then it's time for like happy hour and the 3-hour networking dinner or whatever else, like I'll be there. I'll put my game face on. I don't actually want to be there. I would far rather like be in my hotel room watching the Braves or reading a book. Debbie is an animal at that in all the best ways. Like, because she doesn't run out of words and you put the 99D and the 99I together, she's the best networker I've ever seen in my life because she's hardwired that way. And she'll crash at midnight or 1 a.m. and she'll be back up at 5:30 the next morning like an Energizer bunny running after it. And so you can also understand too, like having different complementary styles in your world is really helpful. If we had to build the company on networking, it wouldn't exist beyond what I could have originally built. However, we've done really well in networking, largely because Debbie has done it, because I don't want to, and I don't have the battery life or the desire to do it. Okay. Now, we finally got to clothing colors. There's two ways you could do this. One is in reading other people, and then two is in like subconscious preparation for the meeting that you're going to have. So hear me out on this. Different behavioral styles tend to favor different colors. The D's and C's are the easiest to read because they tend to lean toward monochrome. So you see a lot of white, you see a lot of black, you see a lot of gray, you see a lot of sort of like dark khaki-ish kind of stuff. And it doesn't mean that, and I say this as a D with a trailing I, like I got pink shirts in my closet. I like pink shirts. When I'm feeling frisky or I want to flex my eye, I'm going to wear a pink shirt. So generally speaking, though, if you looked in my closet, very monochrome with flashes of bright that I selectively wear, or orange because I'm a Clemson grad and we wear orange on Fridays, which is a different story. If I had not gone to school there, I probably wouldn't have a stitch of orange in my closet. As a side note, every time Debbie's around me on a Friday, she says I look like a traffic cone. So that's a different story. Okay, so D's and C's tend to lean toward monochrome. It's a really early indicator. Doesn't mean that an I or an S is not going to wear black or white or whatever else. It's rare that you're going to see an I, and I'm talking about leading personality styles now. So let me explain this. My D at 99 is my leading personality indicator. My I at 65 is my trailing personality indicator. They are both, to give you some disc verbiage here, they are both known as what's above the line. The line is at 50. So anything above 50, you're going to be, it is an observable trait in that person if it is above 50. If it is below 50, it's not that it's not observable because you'd have to just know them a little bit better. Like you couldn't just spot me from afar and know that my S is 2. You'd have to interact with me for a while, particularly under stressful situations, to know that my S is 2. You could pretty easily observe my D and my I. Is that a fair statement? Okay. Mm-hmm. So eyes are always going to lean towards something colorful. If someone's got a leading eye, you're going to see bright colors. You're going to see usually something a little flashy. So these are observations, not in any way a criticism. You'll usually see things like big earrings or jangly bracelets or necklaces, or, you know, it's not to say that people aren't going to wear, all personality styles aren't going to wear those things. It's going to be observable, though, in someone who leads with an I. An I wakes up in the morning sometimes thinking like, I really like this, and I hope someone sees it on me and likes it too and tells me about it. This is really instructive, though, if you're working with a client and you are not that style, and you observe someone who's wearing brightly colored clothes and sort of statement pieces of jewelry, that should be a flashing sign that says compliment them on the way that they look, because that's what they're looking for. Okay, so the high S, that person is going to lean more toward very soft colors. You're going to see like light pastels. You're going to see things that are really generally easy on the eyes. Lots of like earthy kind of tones usually. Again, this is not mutually exclusive. Doesn't mean that they don't have, you know, a stitch of black clothing or something like that in their closet. With clients, you can observe this over time. I'll talk about observing this in people's homes when you're going on listing appointments in just a second too. And then the C is going to be very monochrome as well. So here's another cool thing you could do. Like if I know that I'm going to meet with someone and my goal is to either, you know, connect with them on a subconscious level, or my goal is to be able to influence or persuade them in some way, and I know, or at least I think I know that they lead with I or S, because sort of like naturally for me, I'm going to dress and behave in a manner that D's and C's kind of get. Like I'll tone down my sociability and sort of my all shucks attempt at charm or humor. I'll tone that down for a C. However, like my typical attire is pretty much going to resonate fine with D's or C's. Where I've got to be a little bit more careful is in I's or S's. So if I know that I'm going to be meeting with someone who leads with I'm definitely putting on one of my bright colored shirts. And if I'm going to meet with someone who I know is a high S, then I'm going to pick something that's a little softer. Even like from a contrast standpoint, like more like just muted type tones, not even quite as crisp. And you're like, Bill, good Lord, are you kidding me? Like, why does all of this matter? It doesn't consciously at all. However, there is a 3-part series to influencing people. And this is borrowing from John Maxwell. So you may put this in your notes, and then I'm going to pause and we're going to debrief on this whole thing. There's a 3-part series that you need to be able to do to influence people. In order, number 1 is they have to like you. Number 2 is they have to trust you. And number 3 is they have to believe that you can help them get what they want. Number 1, they have to like you. Number 2, they have to trust you. Number 3, they have to believe that you can help them get what they want. Everything that I've described to you are subconscious tactics in building likability on the way to building trust. You can observe this in people's homes as well. So not only the colors, so D's and C's. Let's draw a distinction here. So you got a lot of qualifiers here. You have rate of speech, fast for the D, slow for the C. You have temperature, sometimes hard to tell between a D and C because D is cool, the C is cold. Might not know. Color of clothing, monochrome. Might not know. Generally speaking, D's are going to have, particularly if they're unaware of this, D's are going to have like big furniture that takes up lots of space. C's are going to be much more like minimalistic and practical. And so sometimes like if you have this DC mix, it's a little confusing. However, if you've got like DI is pretty easy to see because you're going to, generally speaking, have lots of furniture and lots of bright colors everywhere. And you get S's and C's as more practical, more, like soft edges, not necessarily bright colors, stuff like that. So you can begin to not only like you're going on a listing appointment. This is where it can be really instructive. You're doing a tour of the house with the seller. You're observing what they're wearing. You're observing their rate of speech. You're observing the vibe they give off energetically. You're making mental notes of the things that you're seeing around their house that might be instructive to their personality style. And at like the nth level, you're factoring all of that in to how you're delivering your listing consultation in the moment to communicate in a language that you think is most consistent with them based on their observable behaviors in that first 10 or 15 minutes of walking through their house, which would mean you would technically have 4 different versions or 4 different iterations of your listing consult. And all of this now sort of tied up with a pretty little bow on it is I find most people in our business are completely unaware of the things that we just spent roughly 30 or 40 minutes on. And they're losing business because of their lack of awareness around it. And that's not a judgment. Like we all learn, right? So this is new, awesome. If this is refresher, awesome. The thing I'd ask you to take away from this and is this business, and I think just people in general have a really cool way of saying just when we thought we had it figured out, now all of a sudden there's like 35 other things that I need to go learn to stack on top of it. So hopefully this is encouraging that there's a whole nother gear that you can find that's really, really going to help in being additionally influential. Later today, you're going to be at a coffee shop or a restaurant or a car wash or wherever, and there are going to be people there. And you're going to have a chance to interact with some of those people. And your job is this. As you're interacting with them, or as you are a keen observer of them, I'd like for you to begin to draw some conclusions about their personality profile. I've given you lots of ways to do that. Your first, you can see from afar. What are they wearing? How are they dressed? Look at the little things too. The colors are easy. Look at the little things. Look at their jewelry. Look at their shoes. Look at the general cut or fit of their clothing. There's a zillion things you could observe from afar and never even have to engage with that person. You could watch them interacting with other people. I love doing this with, and Sarah, my wife, gets on to me about this. However, I think everything's kind of a learning laboratory. I love doing this in restaurants or bars with the server or the bartender or whoever else. Like, you know, if you're really paying attention, you know, within like the first 30 seconds. And then you could sort of play around with that a little bit. You could, sort of test the way that you're communicating with that particular person. You can look for ways to compliment or flatter them consistent with their behavioral style or their personality style. So go out there today and maybe for the rest of the week, and maybe if you're a nerd like me, the rest of your life, and go be a keen observer of what you're seeing in people and see how that informs you about how you can better communicate with them. Hey everybody, I'm Bill Middleton. I'm the founder and head coach at Middleton Elite Coaching, and the answer is yes. Can we help you create a roadmap for your business? Can we help you recruit and hire talented people, increase your productivity, your profitability, grow your firm, and even help you have a better life? The answers are yes, 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 and yes. If you're interested in more yeses for you, your business, and your family, contact us today so we can help you create the customized game plan to get you there.